Hey everybody, welcome to the Misfit Happy Hour. Today I have Rick Fisher, a floor broker friend and competitor for 40 years from the exchange, and a very knowledgeable trader. He's here to share some stories on today, which is, if you're watching at a later date, it's November 2nd. The Fed just raised rates 75 basis points today. Powell finished his press conference by saying he was not going away with the rate hikes, and they took the SPOOs down 100 handles, which leaves them currently at 37.64 on the 2nd of November. And so without further ado, this is an esteemed colleague, Rick Fisher. I'm sure both of us have many friends and enemies out there from all this time out there. And today we have stories. Basically, it's just a get together and telling stories of the ring. Rick is currently, I believe, in Martha's Vineyard, right?
That's correct.
Right.
That's where I live.
Martha's Vineyard. I'm on Wall Street, literally right across from the exchange where it used to be, Mr. Fisher. And so, well, Rick and I stood about 10 feet away from all these people who are, former S&P locals and other open outcry locals, love to romanticize the way the ring used to be, and I don't think we're here to do that. I think Rick's idea was to maybe share some stories so that we could help at least people avoid future scenarios such as the ones we're going to discuss. Is there anyone? And so hopefully you'll learn that. I was going to ask Rick, is there any particular story you think we should start with?
Well, there's many stories. One of which I want to get to is how I got into this crazy business. And it was a different time in the early 80s. And I graduated Albany College, state school. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no clue. And I heard there was money on Wall Street. So that sounded okay. So I walked down, and there was a park across from the Trade Center at the time. 4 World Trade was a commodity floor. I looked for anyone with a badge like this that Chris will recognize. And I met a woman that said, I can get you on the floor. And
who was that woman? Who was that?
Faith Rothenberg.
Oh my God. Still a trader.
Is she?
Yeah, still a trader. Cotton trader, I believe, right?
Well, I don't know. I can't imagine she's still trading. But anyway,
okay.
Yeah, she got me on the floor. And
how old are you? You're like 20,
22, 23.
Something like that.
And so I got on the floor and I walked through every booth and I said, guys, I'll start for nothing. And I got my first job at $145 a week working for a gentleman named Charlie Fetterbush in gold.
You guys, for everybody watching, Charlie Fetterbush was a huge gold local. Huge.
He was a broker and a local, and he looked just like Stallone. And he had this weight body, but he was a small man. And my job was to hold gum, packs of gum, and a handful of pennies in my pocket. And then gold had 300 people in the ring meaning on the top step brokers stood, and then we traded with all the people beneath us. And in the center of
it was the biggest ring, right?
It was huge.
Yeah.
It was massive, and it was loud. And when I walked onto that floor for the first time, I'm hearing this sound and I don't know what I'm hearing. And and Chris will say, as we got more experienced, we could pick out any sound and know what numbers they were in any place at any time. But at the initial sound, it's like, it's like a stadium. And so the funny joke here, and I'll make it quick, is that I stood behind Charlie, and when he got an order that was to sell or buy, sometimes he got a crazy order where sell 2 of these in 1 month, buy 3 of those in another, and then do it at this price, a ratio of some kind. And there was one man in the center of the ring, this genius named Ira Kulik. And he had his glasses on, and he had his pad, and he was dead center, mile away. And my job was, if Charlie got a crazy order, hand me a penny. I'd hand him a penny, and he would throw the penny through the ring, hit the guy in the head, and then he would get his attention and go, I got to do this. And then he would do the trade, because he was the only one that could manage those weird trades that Charlie had. And
that was
so essentially.
Hey, wait a minute. Wasn't that when gold was going wild?
I was there the day that Sadat had been killed, and sadly, and the place went wild. And I mean, it was only like my first few days.
You must have seen, Rick, you must have seen things, Rick.
Oh, I have. And trading places does not do it justice, but that's exactly where I was. And then about 6 or 9 months later, I heard that they were opening a stock index for the first time on the New York Stock Exchange. And I said,
Right.
wow, why am I in gold when that is the beginning of something that may be better?
Yeah. What did they
So I
have?
left,
They had the grains, they had the gold, they had bonds, right?
mainly for I was in the metals. So it was
It
platinum, gold, silver,
it
and
was
I
even
didn't get anywhere.
before gold, before oil, right?
I believe so. It was the bitter beginning, and let me tell you, there were no rules. You could take the other side of your customers' trades. You could essentially take any price that you wanted, and they had stretch limos sitting out in front of
Right.
Four World Trade, just lined up to go to the Palm Restaurant every night.
Right.
And us little guys making 145 a week and working the day after Thanksgiving, it was that was our job. That was my dues.
I mean, there are
And
stories where the wife calls up and the clerk says to the broker, "Hey, the contractor says we need 10,000 for a new deck," and the guy like crosses some order against himself, and is
that
and then he's like, "Yep, tell her we can put up the deck."
Well, there's one quick story about the man that stood next to Charlie in the ring, and his name was Grippo. I forgot his
Oh
last
yeah,
name.
Grippo. He was huge. He
Grippo
was
was this. He's this
huge.
not. He just was this ugly gorilla that had more hair than Robin Williams at any time. It was just covered in hair and never spoke. And what he would do every once in a while, and never spoke to me, was he would turn to me and he would go like this. Ah. Charlie would go, give him a piece of gum. And that was it. That was my job. Pennies and a piece of gum. So after seven months or so, I decided to go to the stock exchange. And Charlie, who never spoke to me, said, I'm very angry with you and disappointed that you're not staying. And I said, I'm sorry, I have to go. So I moved to the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, where the composite index, which is like the S&P at the time, which we were competing against, we went into another ring where I met Chris, where there were, I don't know, a couple of hundred of us. And we were in this special room next to or adjacent to the stock market floor where the individual specialists were. And the story goes that I wanted to tell you today, which is an allegory. And it's a very important story because I learned a life lesson, and it was very humbling, and I will tell that story now. I had probably been on that floor a couple of years, 3 years, and I was an excellent phone clerk. Phone clerk answers the phone, speaks to the customer, runs into the ring, gets a price, brings it back to the customer. Customer decides, buy 100, sell 100, buy 2, sell whatever. And I had a client named Kurt Ivey. Now, Kurt was this young man, probably young, not young, 40s, and he was from Westport, Connecticut, and he was an aggressive trader. And I don't know where he got his money, but he would like to sell 100 at a time. And in those
Right.
days, 100 is like 1,000 now, a notional
Right.
value. Those contracts were $375,000 each. Of course, it didn't have the volatility since the prices were lower, but it was the real deal.
I mean, for
And
everybody watching, the S&P at that time was trading around 100.
okay, so proportionally, I don't know where the New York Composite was trading, but we
Oh,
were
we were
competing with
trading
them.
about 55.
Right. Well, anyway, this and not to go say anyway in a flagrant or flippant way. Not flagrant. So Kurt had this anger towards another floor broker and trader named Glenn Lakin. Now, this man opposed us on the other side of the ring. He had a beard and he had bravado. If he was, let's say, long, he would scream and bid up the market with volume of sound, louder and louder. And Kurt hated him. He just hated him. I go to the phone one day. We talk early in the morning, and Kurt says to me, "Anytime Lakin opens his mouth, I don't care if he's buying or selling, hit him with 100. Just hit him with 100." I said, "Kurt," he goes, "just do it." So I do. And after a while, Glenn would go, "Sold 100." And he would choke because he was just doing it to defend his position. He didn't intend to buy any more.
Right.
He just pretended. So this is what really annoyed Kurt. And I think they had some other personal issue. And Glenn, with his beard, would become so enraged there would be spit hanging from like a stalactite from this guy's mouth. It was just a vicious scene of warriors and fun. And it was apparent that this was going on a few days. And there was a trader, and I'd like to describe him. He was a specialist from the stock side. His name was Tony Ranella.
Very classy.
This man
very classy
was
guy.
unbelievable. He'd have a white shirt or a blue shirt with pressed white collars, shiny shoes. He was probably in his early 60s. He owned ranches in Virginia. He was as cool as the day is long.
Yep.
He was the man.
Yep.
And he stood right in front of me. And he could go into what we called the smoking room. That was a room where a lot of people smoked cigarettes, but they couldn't smoke them, in our area. And Tony, when he had a bad position on, every once in a while I'd see him in there. He could smoke a cigarette in one drag. I've never seen anybody do that. One drag and the whole Lucky Strike is gone. And then he'd go back into the ring.
Cool as a cucumber, gray hair.
You wouldn't know how bad it is or how good it was. And a great trader doesn't show whether he had a great day or a bad day.
If you ever needed a piece of whatever he took down, he would gladly share it with you as an individual trader.
And he would teach lessons. And my lesson, and this is where the allegory begins. Nice setup. So I'm taking pleasure in that. Kurt, go to the phone. Kurt, did you get him? Did you get him sold? Did you sell him 100? Yeah, I think it was great. Oh, that's fantastic. We heard him and he's laughing and I'm laughing. And I go back into the ring, goes, do it again. And I walk back to the ring and Tony is sitting 1 foot beneath me, standing. And I hit him with 100 and I'm laughing and smiling because I've hurt this guy. And it's working. And Tony turns around and all of a sudden I freeze and he looks me in the eye and he goes, are you enjoying this? And I, no, because if you are, I will never, ever trade with you again. And I never smiled or enjoyed watching the pain of someone suffering or a revenge scenario from that moment on. So what that told me was that envy is a horrible emotion and there's no room for it in your life. To take pleasure in someone losing money or take pleasure in somebody that was big being torn down is a terrible way to act. And I have to thank this man for teaching me that lesson that I've applied to my life, and I've imparted that upon all of you listening today.
So for all the people listening, the ring had very many famous specialists, such as Peter Kellogg, Donnie Stott of Wagner Stott. Peter Kellogg was Spear Leeds and Kellogg, Donnie Stott. I got a job working for Victor through Marshall Harrison, right? These people, the specialists who would come and trade futures, were a different breed. From Rick and I were young kids, but to watch the guys who had been trading and their grandparents trading, and it was like, it's almost like the Mayflower community that had circled around Wall Street, and that was landed gentry. The families and families had run almost the stock exchange as a like a feudal kingdom. And so it was really an amazing education to watch. For once, I asked Peter Kellogg, he was selling them every tick up. And I asked him, and he was selling like 20 lots, which would be the equivalent of 100 S&Ps every tick. And I asked him, just, all due respect, why so bearish? And he said, well, the Dow's never been up more than 20 points. And so this is obviously a place to sell them. And so as you can imagine, the game has obviously changed since then. But for the people who are watching, who are trying to glean any sort of knowledge from this, the story I think you can say is that maybe today you can, all the stories, both good and bad, that come from here probably were lost when the exchanges went electronic. And so hopefully, within these stories, for example, Rick, how many locals did we lose that would average up on one of the, when we started, the Dow was trading 600, and then, it went straight up into 87 pretty much. And how we lost so many people who tried to average up on the, right?
It's dangerous it was sad to watch people. One of the big trading lessons is to never overtrade. And Chris and I witnessed some of the best traders blow out. And why, I can somehow now understand how someone would jump out of a foxhole and try to save, knowing he could die, to save someone else. Your adrenaline is so stupid that you lose control of what you're doing and over trading. Another rule: don't over trade. And another great rule: know when not to trade. And
Or they
it was
people they would get in so deep that they had no chance, or they had no choice but to keep averaging up, right?
exactly. I watched one, and you mentioned him earlier to me before the show. This guy, it's so weird. We called him Blue Eyes. What was his name across the ring? You mentioned him earlier.
Not Coop, not Coop.
I think it was. Yeah, it was Coop. That was his badge. COP. I was on the subway at 4:15 after the close at Chambers Street, and I rode the train to my home. I lived on the Upper West Side. He got off at. He lived on Long Island. Got off at Penn Station, and he turned to me the day before he blew out, and he goes, "Tomorrow, I'm going to blow out."
No
And I went,
way.
absolutely. And I go, "Well, that is impossible. How do you know this?" He goes, "Tomorrow's the day." And he goes in, and I don't see how it was intentional, but he started doing exactly what Chris just described. He started selling them as the market rallied.
Right
Now,
up, right. I
and
mean,
people going short.
everybody has to remember that we'd never seen moves like this. Every day, it was as though you got into a spaceship, you flew to the end of the universe, you got out, what's there? I mean, there was no resistance on the charts. And it was just like we were making record highs every day. And it was just like trees, there was all this, old school thought about trees don't grow to the sky. Not every story has a happy ending. It's got gravity or something's got to stop this thing. And it never stopped.
It's funny because, as we know, panic is much quicker than rallying. So being short is a very nice reward, even Pavlovian, to floor traders, because when it breaks, it goes down, and when it rallies, it climbs that wall of worry.
And then
So it's very
what are all the brokers doing? The brokers are buying for customers, right? So you're always getting the edge. You're like, this guy's paying a stupid high price, sold. And then, there's 40 other brokers who are trying to pay an even stupider high price. And
and they
so,
were
yeah,
usually.
I mean, we have another great story about Norman, who was at the time chairman of the exchange, who was actually trading the options, I believe, right? And he took
Yes,
down Klein. He took down Klein Klein was a clearing firm,
a
and
major firm.
a
And
major clearing firm of the COMEX.
here was a man that had worked his way up to being the president of the exchange itself, representing all of the floor people with the highest respect. And in the last few months, or perhaps even longer, he was actually stealing. And he was so good at it and we didn't know it was happening until it did happen and he couldn't get out. He finally had to throw in the towel and walk into the actual president of the exchange and go, "I have a problem here."
No,
And
he had to
to
have walked into the clearing firm because he was, or no, was it the exchange? He was manipulating
exchange,
settlement prices of these illiquid.
exactly.
When futures on options first got started, there was no order flow. But the market makers were there, or I'm sorry, as you say, the market takers.
Yeah, I'd like to say that. In
Uh,
many ways, they were there only they needed you, but when you needed them, oh, okay, I'm going to just shut the computer off now, and we'll talk about it later. Oh, it sold off 1,000 points. I think I'm a buyer here, and sure enough, it was not worth it being
So
down a
anyway,
thousand.
one day it was just, randomly for months, we'd hear stories from Michael Murray and people who were trading in that universe of options on futures. And before there was any customer order flow like there is now. And they would say, these things are worth, they're in the money and they settled at zero kind of thing. And, but nobody ever put two and two together as though, as the president, you could change the settlement. There was an
Uh,
interesting, wasn't this, Rick, there was also an interesting relationship between surveillance and some of the large brokerage operations with, there
it
were,
seemed to be there seemed to be some corruption there.
yeah, for
Um,
sure. I heard stories and people, we won't name names, but there were envelopes of cash passed between large brokerage groups and the surveillance at the time to keep them sort of off the radar screen of surveillance.
well,
God knows.
I didn't see that. I will agree with you that it probably existed, but I will say that compliance in those days, even to the bitter end, was vicious. They were they enjoyed what they did to try to hurt you if even if you weren't. In Wall Street, we were guilty till proven innocent, and it would be nothing for them to drop off at at 4:15, as we are on now, drop the bomb of a letter saying, you know what, we're going to indict you, and this would be on a Friday before Memorial Day weekend. Oh, thank you very much. I can't reach an attorney, and I have 3 days to suffer. And they would do this consistently, and we could see them coming. So there was a lot to it. They had to. It's not that they were awful people, but they had to keep their jobs, and in some ways they torture me.
Yep.
And
that's how they made their name. I mean, certainly, I mean, Giuliani got elected mayor because he took down Ivan Boesky, I believe it was, for all, or Milken or somebody like that, and as an attorney general. Anyway, back to, so Norm then takes down Klein, and so the exchange almost shut down.
That's correct. They had to suspend trading, I believe. And,
right.
And we had to unwind this guy's trades. So I was actually a broker for some of those trades to get out of those. And I wasn't allowed to charge a commission on it. I was just told, buy 100 of these, sell 100 of those. I'm like, great. I happened to not be having my money. I had some money at Klein, but I learned way back before the New York Stock Exchange. And I have a cute story to tell you about you and I, just before they closed the stock exchange during the crash of '87. This is a great story. I'm so glad I remembered it. But I happen to have my money with another firm as a protection, and you never keep all your money in one bank. And so when Klein blew out, I was still able to be alive. And so I was used as a broker while they were struggling and they were put out of business. And the same thing happened on the New York Stock Exchange during the crash of '87. Chris and I cleared Spear, Leeds, and Kellogg. And they allowed us to trade because they saw the money in our accounts and they knew we were wonderful people. And a lot of other brokers were not allowed to trade because even though they were wonderful, the clearing firms didn't want to take the risk.
Yeah, anybody who cleared Goodman Manister couldn't trade that day.
Correct. So here I am getting orders again to do these trades because I'm still alive. And Chris and I are in the ring. It's 5 minutes to 10, the Tuesday following the New York Stock Exchange close of the crash. And nobody really knows this story except perhaps Chris and I and a few that were there. Between 9:30 and 9:45 on Tuesday, the Dow was down 1,000 points. It was down. It just sold off. And now we're looking at a crash of how many, 690 points the previous day. But in that first half hour, they shut this thing down. The New York Stock Exchange shut down at 10 o'clock. There was nothing anybody could do. The lights were off. It was absolutely devastating. And I remember Chris with like 3 minutes. I bought a one contract because I got, this is just ridiculously cheap. And I had to get out because they didn't know when the exchange was going to reopen. So I took a 13,500 loss on one contract. And I remember Chris with like a quarter of a second left before they were going to shut it down. He sells 10 contracts and he buys 10 contracts back and he makes $5,000 in like a quarter of a second. I was smiling because this is just stupid. And Chris was able to just be in the right place at the first second. He was so quick, this man in front of you. And it was the scalp, what we called it. And I was just awed by it and I'll never forget it. I walked out of the exchange, went to the Frank National Bank across the street to sit down in my trading jacket and go, well, I never got out of that. I got out of that trade. I took my loss and I was watching people selling apples. It was as if the world came to an end. Came back in at 5 to 10 or 10 after 10, whatever it was after 10. And we're looking up at the screen and all of a sudden there's a little light blinking. And we're like, well, everything's closed. There was this funny, tiny stock index called the XMI in Kansas City. And somebody was buying. And somebody was buying everything in that index, but nothing else was open. And it just kept flicking green. And so the Dow was no longer down. We're down to 5,000 or down 500 or down 50 or down even 100 points. It was up on the day. And had I held my one contract, I did the math, when we opened up at 10:30, I would have made $46,000 where I was originally long. It was, and I was laughing because.
So what's the moral of the story? You have to get out when you don't know is the moral of the story. You had no choice.
Well, I did. And the moral of the story also, who was that buyer is pretty much the story I have. And I always wondered, who's that guy? Who was that Federal Reserve that was buying that stock?
That was the beginning of the Fed's involvement, as far as I knew, I'd never seen them show up. Okay, so far we know, right? Always make sure that you have your money spread out, right? That's a good thing, right? Not one clearing firm. I had my money at MF Global and at Revco. Should we go down the list of all the clearing firms? Klein, right? Revco went bust.
There was Prudential. There was E.F. Hutton. There were so many.
Right.
That
Goodman Manister went bust.
that's and I think UBS at some points, even in the late part of our careers, was on the ropes by certain clients that we actually had that were put at such risk.
Shall we tell so Rick and I,
let's dig into that story a little as another lesson that we can pass upon traders so that perhaps they won't make the errors that we've seen others make. And I think that's the moral of a lot of what we're talking about today.
Right.
For example, my allegory is do not take pleasure in someone else's pain. Know your exit door at in every trade. Where am I going to get out? Can I get out? So here I am exactly at in the crosshairs of a market being closed. I had no idea where I was going to get out. Why did I get into a trade without knowing I had an exit? These are lessons that you try to follow.
Michael Pinellas, who was also a very wily local at the time, said that he was long that day because if the market didn't rally, every specialist firm in the country would have been broke. That's an interesting logic. Anyway, so Rick and I, we came across somehow this guy from Argentina. How did we come across this guy from Argentina? Or did you know the UBS? You did UBS business.
Well, he had been through major clearing firms, and once the clearing firms realized the risk that they were under, they would bounce him. They would say, you can't be with us. And he started with a group of people called the Dowds, and they had their own brokerage firm, and they were, I would say, some of them were ethical. I would say some of them were not so ethical. And they would say the same about me, but that's where the client landed first.
And so this guy discovered that if he sold wing puts 2 standard deviations down from the current trading level of the market, that they didn't hit the risk balance sheet so that you could carry ginormous positions and risk would not even know about it. And what was interesting is he was selling puts for 2 ticks. And in that case, in the old, when the S&Ps were the full size S&Ps, they were $50 they were selling puts for. And so apparently the rule is if you live in a foreign country, you can get greased back on the commissions that you charge your clients. You work this out with your clearing firm. You say you charge this client. What did he charge? $17 a lot? Do you know? Something like that? $12, $13 a lot?
Crazy.
Yep. And so currently that would be about 50 cents or so, maybe $1 on if you were doing it at Interactive Brokers. But it was all completely legal. In other words, if you're domiciled in his case, a South American country, you can charge what they would call a consulting fee. And then so that's just your arrangement between you and the clearing firm. And what's interesting is being in a South American country, you're also out of the country. So you're outside of being legally
down to the yes, which has been changed, but yes, that was the time of
right. And so he was also using individually segregated accounts. He was trading using a power attorney, and so it was all very smart on his behalf, right? He could assume the customers who did not know what the risk they were signing up for would never ever hear from risk because they were down 2 standard deviations. So he would call up and want to sell. Rick, here, describe a phone call.
He would call up and
from a cafe.
He would ask, I can use his accent because that's ridiculous. You'd have this accent from Argentina. He'd call Chris or he'd call Rick, and they would say, where's the market in these 2 standard deviations down, whatever. And he would sell options for $0.10, which is $50.
He'd sell the puts.
But he'd sell puts for 2,000 of them. And then nobody really, people would buy them because it was like insurance. they didn't mind giving up $50 times 1,000 contracts because it wasn't that much money for a specialist or a market maker. And that risk protection, that put, so to speak, could be used in case the market did crash. And they had this, because then those dime puts could, with the VIX rallying, could be worth $1.50.
Yeah, all
And
the
guess
like big,
what?
like we would offload them to Goldman or Ronin and things like that. And the reason they would buy them is that they would buy them because they would say nobody ever sells puts for 2 ticks ever. So it was as though,
So it was good for them. And more often than not, this client did well.
I mean, it
You know,
was
he made
amazing. It was amazing. He would have 15, 20,000 of these full-size puts for every expiration, right?
yep.
And the
And
exchanges
that,
love this because it increased the open interest. And the UBS loved this because they were charging huge commissions. And the clients loved it because they had no idea the risk they were taking, but there was a steady stream of income every month.
and we liked it too because we got to execute those trades and get a commission as well.
Right,
Um,
floor brokerage
it
commissions.
was good for everyone in a way. But what truly was bad about it was that the clients, again, didn't understand the risk. The clearing firms were greedy and just wanted to earn the commissions. The exchange would let it go because they were getting their commission plus the open interest, as Chris mentioned. And this man had no care about his clients. Truly, he didn't. He got them a decent return. Every month, more often than not, as most sellers of puts, they can get away with it for 10 years. But
Had
then
a
there's that
respect,
one
right?
year.
A respectable man in the investment community in Argentina. He claimed a pedigree education, was married to a very nice woman who was a psychiatrist and intelligent in her own right. And so 2008 rolls along, and 2008 had never happened. And our friend in Argentina continued to sell those wing puts. Did you ever warn him of the danger?
I think we did very often, especially he'd done this before. It wasn't just 2008, but there had been some scenarios where he sold them too close. Sometimes he got a little aggressive with 15 cents at a higher strike where he was not in that exact formula. He got a little greedy. And so a less of a down move would ignite his puts. And he would have to ride it out or cover. He'd have to come up with the margin. And many times he'd blow out because who's ultimately responsible for that loss? His clients, not him,
Right.
and the clearing firm that holds those trades. So, and the clearing firm doesn't necessarily actually execute the trades. They have people that work for them and they call us. He calls them, they call us. The client calls the person upstairs. That person calls me on the floor and says, sell 2,000 puts. And I would do that. And whenever he created this disaster, the money he'd just walk away and hide. And somebody is stuck with this huge loss. And he threw it on his clients. And ultimately, he threw it on the clearing firms and that one person that was called by him directly. And he hurt all those people so they were out of business. He blew them out.
Yeah.
They were ultimately responsible for his loss, and he would just fly to the Cayman Islands and hang out and wait for it to come back. He actually called me once, and he just said, "Don't tell anybody where I am. I am. Where's the market? It's $2.50 bid at 3, and he's short at a dime."
And he would sell 2,000 minimum every day, every single day. And every day. One thing we did learn, which was interesting about this, is that when you sell puts way down, in this case, way out the skew, he would sell them 45 days out to expiration for 2 ticks.
Right.
And what we learned from the market makers was that they actually started to think that he might be onto something because as you move closer to the strike, the implied vol comes in. So if you actually hedge them with futures, you're capturing the skew to such a large degree. It's just a large dislocation to the downside. There's just no way to hedge that. You can't get the future, a gap of any sort. You're just done. But I did remember at one point, because the market makers would take down tens of thousands of these things every month. And then one day they just had an epiphany. They're like, Jesus, he's selling them at 70 vol. But as they move closer to the money, they're only 30 vol. And so, there was that working in his favor, and it was an interesting perspective that was interesting. Do you remember Howie Cohen?
Yeah, I do.
Remember Howie Cohen got blown out in the 87 crash for being short calls? Did you know that?
Yes, yes. I remember that.
And you can imagine he was right direction, but the vol blew out so hard that he got blown out. Right. Anyway, so to anybody wondering whatever happened to our friend from the South America, as far as we know, he still is no longer in business. The UBS had to unwind the position in the middle of 2008. And the UBS trader who unwound it, I think through Rick, was amazing. It was one of the best traders I've ever seen in the face of a disaster. And they had one, of course, in a bear market, you're going to get these huge snapback rallies. And he used that one snapback rally to get out of tens of thousands of puts. And I mean, the losses had to have been into hundreds of millions of dollars. And anyway, the moral of the story is if you're letting somebody else run your money, or you're thinking about letting somebody else run your money, make sure that you understand the risk that they're putting you in, and B, make sure that they're accountable. What else would you say would be the lesson from this, Rick?
The biggest lesson I learned is check your statement every day. Make sure that every day to see what the activity was. Even today in a bank statement, just what is the activity? What is happening here? So that you are made aware of, this doesn't make sense. But if you just close your eyes and just let autopilot go, there's a risk potential that you might not see, and it could be devastating. I've seen it happen. And so I do say that to so many traders: make sure you check every morning or at night. Don't just not look at your statement. Don't listen to Warren Buffett when he says, when it's going down, crawl into a cave. Yes, don't look at it because it's going to make you feel bad. But in terms of a short-term trader, you need to check. If you're having commodity futures on, options, you need to look. You need to make sure that things are not happening that you're unaware of. So that would be a lesson that I can impart. I made that error once, and it cost me a small amount, but I never made that error again. I check my stuff.
Yeah, I remember Rick was once caught in a lumber trade.
Oh,
which is why I've never traded.
That's another lesson. Don't trade in a liquid market. Don't trade in a market that has like 3 people and trades 2 lots of 2 contracts a day.
Right. You were following some newsletter guy who was shorting lumber, and it went up like 9 days in a row. Hey, have you ever heard of any? I mean, we've always heard about airport trades. And for people watching, there was definitely lore of people strapping on a huge position and then going to the airport. And we knew that there was no extradition treaty with Panama at the time. So they would buy a ticket to Panama. And if the trade worked out, they would just not go to Panama. And if the trade didn't work out, they would hop the flight to Panama. Did you ever hear of anybody actually doing that?
I did. And I had a different client that was given to me by someone that felt it was a little fishy. And this man this unknown person did a lot of brokerage and was from Canada. And all of a sudden, he would just say, just sell 100 and then wait a minute and buy another 100, buy it back. And then an hour or 2 later, he would say, sell 100 and buy another 100 back. So he'd give away to the locals, he'd give away $5,000. But what was he really doing? He was money laundering.
Right.
He was capturing the one side that was right, and then the one side that was wrong, he could give to clients that had to offset capital gains somewhere else. So it was it was a trade where all of a sudden I got a little letter from the exchange going, we see something here that doesn't make sense. And that phone never rang again. That guy disappeared, gone. And that was a money launderer.
And then there was also a way of avoiding taxes forever, right? You could do a spread where you take the loss in the current year and then roll for example, do a December March spread, and then price the Decembers at a point where they're at such a huge loss, you would wipe out your gain. But then the March futures contract would actually just have the profits in them. And because it was a calendar difference between December and March, that the Marches didn't register at the time. So people for for decades, people would just do these spreads and never pay taxes until I guess, till they retired.
If you could find the loophole, and there is not, a law is only as good as it's enforced. And so there were things that happened that, for example, perhaps, not saying it's true, that the exchange may have just not seen it. And brokers or clients were savvy enough to see an opening, and maybe a rule hadn't been created yet. And you're not breaking a rule if it hasn't been created. And so, yes, back in gold in those days, there were stretch limos, and it was legal to do what they did. And it was, compared to now, where front running or prearranged trading is now illegal, and obviously should be. But in those days, it was okay, and that was not so long.
Hey, do you ever see somebody just walk into the ring and be good right off the bat?
There is a thing called beginner's luck. I really did see some traders walk in that were given daddy gave them money, and right. Walk in the ring, and for 5 straight days, we would be scratching our heads going, how's this guy making money? And then he would lose thousands of dollars over the following week and be gone. Daddy took his money, no money back. He lost it all. But there were some traders in the ring that we could never, ever understand how great they were. There was some, you look at a Steph Curry basketball player, and there were traders in the ring that were that talented and gifted. One was this gentleman back in the day named Mike Pole. Was that his name?
Gary.
Gary Pole. Gary was this very understated man that would walk into the ring, and he could do no wrong. It was almost as if he had a half a second edge of knowing what was going to happen. And he was totally legal, totally straight. He was just as honest as could be, but he made so much money. And again, very stoic, didn't show emotion, but for some reason, all of a sudden he'd buy 100 contracts and it would go straight up.
Isn't that interesting? The hotheads didn't do so well, right? If we think about it, right? The hotheads.
This man was exceptional.
You talk about Ranella. You talk about Ranella being cool.
No, I'm talking about Gary Pole.
I know, but I understand that. But Ranella also
different kind of. Yes, stoic, absolutely. And it's very important to keep emotion out of the game.
What about Kurt Ivey?
Kurt was emotional. He took pleasure. He was laughing. He was hurting. He was very emotional. And
so were you. You were also emotional, if I recall. So was Danny Hockman, Buck, right? Bucky was also very emotional. Even the Irish guys, Kevin McNamara and Boggy and those guys were very much emotional about taking losses.
It's funny how traders only talk when they lose money. When they make money,
they never don't say it. Well, we always expect to win, right? We expect.
How about be a little happy, all right? Oh, it's a bad day. And then there's 3 days in a row where he's not talking. And we go, that guy made a lot of money.
Right.
And that's the funny thing, too, that they're willing to share their pain, but not their pleasure. That's not connected to my allegory.
What do we tell the people who are watching and interested in learning, and as though, there's a cliche about like all this experience that we had in the ring and stuff like that. People want to romanticize it or like those were the days, but that's not really the case now. Those were the days that aren't really relevant to the markets that we're trading now. So what would you say if someone's watching and being like, where do I go for the answer?
Discipline. That is the answer. I have my first real boss on the stock exchange was a very, very famous trader, and he did his homework. He did so much homework. I've never seen the man lose, and he would take it very personal if he did. I remember him telling me this one story. I think it was his wife that told me. He was out of Greenwich, Connecticut. I don't want to mention his name. He would probably not be happy. I don't think anybody would be happy that I mentioned any names.
Is he still alive?
He is. I believe he is.
Oh, great.
But he made the rules, and he put them in a vault, and he gave them only to his employees and told us that we are forbidden to share any. And but I would like to share one.
It's like Raiders of the Lost Ark of trading rules.
It's really, they're such simple. They're so simple.
Come on, read them already. Read them.
Come on.
No, read them all. all. Come on.
I can't because some of them are a little archaic, but
Oh, come
the
on.
most
And
important
from
one that
what time out, what year are these from?
these probably were written in the early 80s.
Okay, so they're not, they're, you can
Oh, they're
like,
relevant though. Oh, they're the rules. I'll go through some
I
of
would
them.
suggest we reserve the right here on the receiving end to throw out any of these rules.
Well, number one, shall we?
Yes.
I'm going to put a little light on here. Well, I don't need it. Number one, play with your offense, not your defense. In a sporting event, the offensive team does most of the scoring. In trading, the same holds true. If a trader has an unrealized profit while positioned to achieve a predetermined objective, the odds of achieving that objective are greatly enhanced. Fear is reduced or eliminated, confidence abounds, and profits are accruing. Conversely, a trader who is positioned while experiencing an unrealized loss suffers with insecurities, is subject to fear, premature liquidation, loss of profit, and accruing a loss. How's that? That's one of the rules. I left out a paragraph because it's just more than enough.
Yeah,
Number
that's
two,
pretty good. That's pretty
number
good, right?
two, make trades that have the best probability of gain, not the ones that have the best dollar gain.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
That means that, yeah, you like the setup.
You don't have a dollar objective. You
Right.
have an objective to do a trade for a reason. And when you get out, it isn't determined by how much money you're up. It's determined by the reason of getting out. That is rule number two.
Read that again. Read that again.
Make trades that have the best probability of gain, not the ones that have the best dollar gain.
Thank you.
There's a whole paragraph here, but we're going to move on to rule number three. Have the wind at your back.
Yeah, George Reichhelm would always say, why are you fighting the crowd? It's much easier to swim with the tide.
Going with the trend is more easily said and done. By shorting, I'm going to turn the page here, by shorting stocks that have already had significant moves is akin to assuming a gust of wind will continue far more than a short period of time. Although, as stated in the rule number 2 that I just read, a trader must make the trades that have the best probability of gain while having the wind at his or her back. There must be a judgment as to the nature of that wind, evaluation of absolute volume, transactional volume, price action, and some of the criteria to determine the near-term velocity of that wind. Price, and this is in huge bold print, is not a valid criteria.
Beautiful, right? Price is empty of meaning for those people who are white. Price only exists to facilitate the transaction. So cheap or expensive is subjective. And
This is one of my favorites. Yes, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And the wind is just the speed of price through time.
Number 4. This is, I think, is so helpful, and I think this is really one of the most wonderful. And I will say this now. Number 4, start liquidating not when you're wrong, but when you are not right.
I've seen you. That's the way you traded that way.
That's correct. And that's because I had the rules.
Yep.
Shut up.
Just keep reading.
Well, I took my losses, man. Let's not.
Yeah, you were quick to bail. I mean, that was your way of trading for sure.
Actually, I have at this very table that I'm sitting at today, I lost $73,000 in 3 hours.
You're not winning. You're not winning fans there.
That goes to never overtrade.
Yeah.
That goes to that rule that I violated. My meaning to that is, let's say you're down a little money, don't try to make it back. Walk away, come back later, and then start again.
Yeah.
Tiger Woods was amazing because he could have a terrible hole, and he had the psychological confidence to go to the next hole as if it were the first hole of the day. He could actually discount that other one, that bad one, and start fresh. That is an amazing ability. That's required in trade. Number 5, define the edge of each trade. Before initiating a trade or position, a trader must prepare a game plan for assumption of risk and the prospects for reward. The risk-reward ratio is an assumption of risk and the prospects of reward. The risk-reward ratio is determined by assessing the projected dollar loss versus the gain, factored by the probability of the loss versus the probability of the gain. The result becomes a number, which equates to the edge of the trade. The higher the number, the greater the edge.
Pretty good, right? Have a game plan.
Number 6, always have a specific reason for your action or your reaction, or inaction.
Right.
Or inaction.
Or inaction. What was that? For action, reaction, or inaction?
Actually, it's action or inaction. Let's say that again. Always have a specific reason for your action or inaction. A trader's job function is to make decisions which are determined by a conviction. A trader's job function is to make decisions which determine a conversion from cash, which has no price risk, to a security or other vehicle which has price risk, and reverse when appropriate. Within the process, any action of or inaction taken or not taken by a trader must be explained. Anything short of this strongly suggests a trader is not doing his job.
Right, that's a gunslinger, as someone who's not doing their job. Right, just random.
I'm getting to my favorite, but we're not there yet. Okay, here's another great one. Number 7, make your ego work for you. Don't rationalize your mistakes.
Right. Don't be a victim.
To a great majority of mistakes by traders are self-inflicted. A trader knows better, but emotionally he or she cannot act properly. Ego, most often, is the culprit. To overcome this difficulty, a trader must define his or her mistakes, not rationalize them, and work hard not to make them again. A trader who continues to make the same mistakes by either rationalizing or not attempting to correct has little chance to succeed over long periods of time.
And you know what's interesting is when you correct those mistakes, there's no one who notices. It's a very hard-fought battle that the only person that really is congratulating you is you, because it's such a private, right? Because your mistakes were different.
Without the ego, one should be proud of themselves in a way of understanding that they're learning, they're gaining their ability to become a better trader. Yeah. I learned from another, this is not a rule, but I learned this from a psychologist who said, always remember, you'll always be an amateur. It really is very interesting to think that no matter how great you are, you're still an amateur. It kind of puts things in perspective. I always honored that one thing that this person honored many things, but that was one lesson I learned from her that I use today.
Who was that? What was her name?
Her name was Arlene Cagle. She actually, Dr. Arlene Cagle, and she retired. She's written several books, many books. She was actually, there was a John Tesh show where it was kind of like he'd play a few songs, but mostly it had some kind of cool hack things. And she was quoted on there. Well, Dr. Arlene, she didn't even know it. Well, Dr. Arlene Cagle said, always remember to be an amateur when you think, something like that. And I told her that story, and she was surprised because she didn't know she was on the radio. All right, my favorite.
Wait. Okay, your favorite, and then after that, it's been an hour. We can't. It's a long. Yeah, and how about this? Will you come back?
I will. We have a lot more to discuss, and I also want to put a disclaimer in that if I mention any names, I apologize to anyone who heard any. It was not meant in any intent to hurt you or make you feel bad or represent my true feelings. I'm good with everyone these days, so. I just wanted to say that if you felt hurt, I'm sorry. I take it back. I do not want to hurt anyone's feelings. Okay, that being rule number 8, and we'll close it out and we'll sign off. This is my personal favorite. Do not wallow in self-pity. We all make bad decisions, poor trades, and experience losing streaks. The sooner one accepts the above, the faster one will be able to return to making money. Accept your losses and move on to the next trade. Wallowing in self-pity will position your ability to make the next trade a profitable one. Actually, that says backwards, but okay. Accept the good and the bad, stay upbeat, and you will have a far easier time generating consistent profits. A good trader will always say to him or herself, what action can I take within the next minute to, to better my trading business? And I love this last line. Any focus to the contrary is counterproductive.
What was the guy's name? Yeah, who wrote it? Who wrote it?
Can't tell you. I can't tell you. The guy will kill me. If he
right.
finds out Bob Cantor, he will absolutely kill me. Bob Cantor. Didn't say it. Never heard of him. Don't know who he is. But I will say that this is a man who could be down in October, November on the year, will lock himself in a room in December and turn the year around. And I've known he did it. He did it, and he did. And he never had a losing year. He did his homework. He followed these rules, and I hope that you will follow those as well. Thanks for having me.
And thank you and I will hopefully have you back. And everybody, Rick has a show on Friday nights on what radio station?
I have a radio station that I do a 2-hour and 10-minute live show once a week on Fridays at 10 to 12:15. You
at
can
night.
Go to
at night
p.m. That's Eastern Standard Time. I have fans from all over the country. I play melodic music. Each show is in 3 sets. You can reach me at WVVY, and that's www.wvvy.org. It's a very small station, but if you do that, you can stream it. There's a app called radio.garden, which I fully recommend. It's amazing. It's free. Download it. It'll show the globe, and it'll have tiny little green lights representing all the radio stations across the globe that you can tune into and get high fidelity. So you can punch in WVVY, go to radio.garden, punch in WVVY, tune in. I implore you to enjoy fantastic music to end your week and to start your weekend. And it's wonderful. And I'm good at what I do.
It's great. I highly recommend it. What would you describe that? What's a genre? What's a genre, Rick?
Well, the genre is melodic and progressive music. You could say that it's electro lounge would be the best way to put it. Okay. It's in 3 parts. I tell you when the parts are. The first half an hour or 10. They usually average around 32 records. It takes me about 20 hours to put a show together. Imagine that for only 32 songs. It's in 3 parts. First part is more dance and chill. Second part is really melodic and progressive house, building to an apex and then smoothing down to part 3, which is just delicious music that brings you to a point where you just want to cuddle, but then I bang it at the end just to twist you a little, going, well, I'm not going to let you go to sleep though. And I usually go over with an encore. And it truly is, I'm very good at what I do. I'm still an amateur. I will always leave it at that. But
or a floor broker.
And my focus is on new releases, and there's so many artists from around the globe that are making music that are just absolutely fantastic. And I do new releases every week, and some of the songs that I play were released that day, but they have to go through my curation and refining, otherwise I won't play them.
All right, WVVY, right?
That's it, WVVY LPFM, and if you go to radio.garden, just punch that in, make sure it's WVVY.
And that's in Martha's Vineyard for everybody who's on the island. And go visit Rick. He's in Martha's Vineyard all year round. So
yes. And the good news is that on the West Coast it's 7:00, so people are eating dinner and getting ready to go out. So it's sort of good for anyone. A lot of work goes into it, and I want to just say that thank you, Chris, I can see how wonderful this is, and I really am honored to be on here and to share memories, but also to learn and to be able to share what we've learned. And maybe I was able to just offer just a thought, a little grain of something that can improve your ability to be a better person.
And a better trader for everybody out there. Please listen.
Follow the rules. Discipline.
Discipline, right? Okay. Talk to you later, everybody. Bye now.